On a cold day in Manhattan, January 7, 1904, Louise Boldt died at age 42. Within hours, a telegraph carried a short order north along the Hudson and up the St. Lawrence River to a small island scattered with tools, scaffolding, and fresh-cut stone. The message was simple: stop all construction. On Hart Island, around 300 workers were building a 6-story private castle with 120 rooms and nearly 44,000 square feet of interior space. When the foreman read the message, chisels went silent. Painters set down their brushes. Carpenters placed saws on sawhorses and stood still. Then, in a quiet line, the workers left the island. The project had been planned as a grand gift from George Boldt, a hotel genius who had once been a poor immigrant, to his wife Louise. The castle was meant to be given on Valentine's Day, a stone and steel promise of love. But after Louise's death, George Boldt never returned. The unfinished building stayed behind like a paused heartbeat, frozen in time at 90% completion. This is not just a story about a castle. This is a story about how love can build empires and how grief can stop them in an instant. The story begins far from the Thousand Islands, inside the crowded kitchens of New York City. In 1864, a boy of 13 stepped off a ship from Prussia. His name was George Karl Boldt, born on April 25, 1851 on the island of Rügen in the Baltic Sea. Back home, he had seen summer resorts and old castles that touched the sky. In America, he had nothing: no money, no English, and no family at his side. He found a job in a dockside hotel doing the lowest tasks. As a busboy, he cleared tables, scrubbed pots, carried trash, and slept in a basement room. The pay was tiny, but he watched carefully. He learned what many people missed: a great hotel isn't only about buildings or food, it's about how people feel. If guests feel important and cared for, they come back and they tell their friends. By his early 20s, George had moved up to kitchen management. He tried his luck in Texas but returned poorer than before. Back in New York, he took another kitchen job and kept learning. Then a new door opened. In 1876, a respected club steward named William Carr needed someone strong and steady to manage the dining room of the Philadelphia Club, the oldest and most exclusive gentlemen's club in America. George accepted the offer and moved to Philadelphia. At the club, he learned the quiet rules of elite society: service should anticipate needs, discretion is absolute, beauty should never shout. He did the job well. And there he met William Carr's daughter, Louise Augusta Carr. She had grown up around hospitality, design, and taste. With her father's approval, they courted. On June 14, 1877, George married Louise. He was 26. She was 17. What made their union special was not money but partnership. They would build everything together. By 1881, the couple had saved enough to take a risk. George bought the Bellevue Hotel at Broad and Walnut Streets in Philadelphia. It was more a serious restaurant than a true hotel, but it was theirs. Louise transformed the experience with ideas that seem simple today but were bold then: fresh flowers on every table, soft candlelight, more space between tables for privacy, and a clean, graceful look from the moment guests walked in. She understood something many businessmen ignored: wealthy women wanted beautiful public places outside the home where they could meet, host, and be seen with dignity. The Bellevue became that place. The food, led by chefs whom George paid well, was excellent. But people talked about Louise's touches, the feeling that this room was made for them. Word spread. Soon the city's elite were regulars. George then bought the Stratford Hotel across the street, controlling both corners of a busy intersection. With competition gone and taste on their side, the Boldts were now a force. Powerful New Yorkers visited Philadelphia often and booked tables at the Bellevue. One of them was Abner Bartlett, a real estate agent who worked with William Waldorf Astor, heir to one of America's richest families. Bartlett noticed George's management and Louise's design instincts. He told Astor about the couple. In 1891, William Waldorf Astor began planning a new kind of hotel on Fifth Avenue in New York, bigger, grander, and more refined than anything in America. He needed the right leader. He invited George to come to New York and run it. There was one problem: the Astor family was at war with itself. John Jacob Astor IV, Mrs. Astor's son, disliked his cousin William Waldorf. Both owned land next to each other on Fifth Avenue. Each planned to build a rival hotel, both using the same architect, Henry Hardenberg. Despite the risk, George said yes. He would need to raise $100,000 just to furnish the place. He trusted Louise's taste to make the new hotel feel like a private palace rather than a noisy business. The Waldorf opened on March 13, 1893 in the middle of a national economic crisis. Stress nearly broke George, but he held on. The Waldorf offered exclusive calm for those who could afford it. During hard times, the very rich often spend more to show their status remains untouched. The hotel became a success. Then John Jacob Astor IV opened the Astoria next door in 1897. George did something few could have pulled off. He convinced both cousins to merge operations. A corridor joined the two buildings. The Waldorf Astoria was born, the largest hotel in the world with over 1,600 rooms. It quickly became the address for presidents, tycoons, weddings, and deals. Everywhere, Louise's quiet influence showed. She insisted on fresh flowers daily, soft lighting that flattered faces, tasteful rooms that felt welcoming, and signs that respected women as equal guests. She removed ladies' entrances and let women walk in through the main doors, small changes that sent big messages. The hotel also pushed new ideas that are now standard, room service and signature dishes that spread nationwide. By the late 1890s, George was one of the highest-paid employees in the country and also held profitable leases. Estimates of his fortune range from $15 to $25 million then, hundreds of millions in today's money. The Boldts lived in suites at the Waldorf Astoria, sent George Jr. to Cornell and Clover to the Spence School. They had climbed from basement kitchens to the top of American society. Even with success, life inside a famous hotel is tiring. You are always on, always fixing, judging, choosing, and hosting. George remembered the quiet islands and castles of his childhood. Louise wanted a place that was private and theirs. In the summer of 1895, they visited the Thousand Islands, an area of more than 1,800 islands along the St. Lawrence River where wealthy families built summer homes on private land surrounded by water. Unlike Newport's stage-like social life, the Thousand Islands felt personal. Families could sail, fish, picnic, and read without an audience. The Boldts stayed at a grand hotel but longed for something that didn't need a reservation desk. They looked at islands for sale. Many were taken. Then they heard about Hart Island, about 5 acres near Alexandria Bay, with a cottage built by Congressman E. Kirk Hart. The land had just changed hands, but within days, Louise bought it herself. The recorded price was $1, likely a legal number, not the true cost. Once the papers were signed, George altered the spelling to Hart Island. He even had the shoreline reshaped so that from above it looked like a Valentine heart. He wanted the symbolism to be clear. This was a place for love, not just a summer address. By 1899, the cottage felt too small. The Boldts did not want just more rooms. They wanted a true home where the family could gather in comfort and invite guests without turning it into a hotel. Louise dreamed in detail: fine light, good flow from room to room, gardens that felt European but didn't fight the local landscape. George made a decision that matched his boldness and his heart. He would build a castle, not just a mansion called a castle, but a design inspired by the Rhineland towers and keeps he remembered from Prussia. He hired the Philadelphia firm G.W. and W.D. Hewitt. The instruction was clear: design the grandest private castle in America. Louise reviewed plans and gave strong input on layouts, lighting, and finishes. The goal was not a showpiece for strangers. It was a functional family home with beauty and strength. The plan called for a 6-story main building with multiple towers, 120 rooms, and a footprint around 170 by 160 feet. The exterior would be built from rose-colored granite quarried from nearby Oak Island, which George also bought for the project. The budget was set at $2.5 million, well over $80 million in today's value. George could afford it. He chose Valentine's Day 1905 as the symbolic date to unveil the finished home to Louise. The main castle was only part of the idea. George planned a complete island estate, a yacht house on Wellesley Island, tall and long enough to hold large boats including a 104-foot houseboat named La Duchesse. A powerhouse on Hart Island disguised as a medieval tower but built to hold a steam generator that would supply modern electric light to every room and walkway. The Alster Tower, a playful guesthouse inspired by a German defense tower with a bowling alley, billiard room, library, bedrooms, and a kitchen. A dramatic water entrance arch so visitors arriving by boat would feel they were passing into a private kingdom. Italian gardens with pools, statues, terraces, and walking paths designed according to Louise's taste for order, color, and grace. Work would happen from spring to fall each year. Winters on the river were too harsh for transport. 300 workers were hired. A small city of barracks, workshops, and docks appeared almost overnight. The existing cottage sat where the main castle needed to rise, so workers dismantled it during winter when the St. Lawrence River froze. They hauled the parts across the ice to Wellesley Island, rebuilt it, and made it a clubhouse. Now the island was clear. Barges carried granite blocks, lumber, and steel. The Oak Island quarry cut stone to measure. Everything had to be planned in advance. George, who ran the Waldorf Astoria like a conductor with a baton, applied the same logistics to the island: schedules, teams, standards. By the end of 1900, the support buildings had made dramatic progress. The yacht house rose to more than 50 feet high and stretched about 160 feet in length. The powerhouse foundation was laid and its round walls began to climb. The Alster Tower reached its height, purposely crooked and slanting outside but cheerful and modern inside. In the center of Hart Island, the castle's massive foundations were set and the steel frame began to rise. During 1901 and 1902, the castle's exterior grew fast. The granite, pinkish in sunlight and tough in winter, was placed block by skilled masons. The drawings called for towers of different heights so the roofline would feel like a story told in steps. Windows were framed for both views and airflow. Throughout the design, small heart shapes appeared in stone carvings and railings, quiet symbols of purpose. Inside, the plan balanced public and private spaces, a grand hall and main rooms below, family bedrooms and guest rooms above, and modern systems hidden in lower levels. Tunnels allowed staff to move between buildings and reach the powerhouse in any weather. Outside, Louise worked closely with landscapers to set the gardens. She wanted formal lines, geometric beds, fountains that caught the sun, and quiet corners for reading. The island was meant to feel both strong and soft, like a home protected by stone but warmed by light. By 1901, Louise felt unusually tired and short of breath. At first she ignored it. The hotel still demanded decisions and Hart Island needed her eye, but doctors eventually warned that she was seriously ill. Treatments were limited: rest, fresh air, light activity. Even sick, Louise remained involved. Workers built temporary ramps so she could reach upper floors without climbing. She reviewed tiles, wallpapers, and light fixtures from chairs placed near windows. She chose fabrics and furniture styles from samples brought to her. The castle was still hers in spirit even as her body slowed down. George pushed the work forward. By late 1903, most interiors were far along. Systems were being tested. Gardens were planted and waiting for spring. The last big push would run through 1904. And then on February 14, 1905, he would walk Louise through a finished home. But in January 1904, her strength failed. On January 7, 1904, Louise Augusta Carr Boldt died in Manhattan. George Jr., and Clover were with her. The death certificate listed heart failure. George sent the telegram. On Hart Island, men put down their tools. The castle stood about 90% complete, exterior finished, windows and doors installed, most rooms plastered and floored, some already furnished. The yacht house was ready. The powerhouse could run. The gardens were in and waiting for spring. George never reversed the order. He did not come back to the island. Work had been for Louise. Without Louise, finishing felt wrong. Life and business did not pause forever. George returned to his duties, perhaps because work gave shape to his days. He still summered in the Thousand Islands but chose Wellesley Island, not Hart Island. He could see the castle across the water and chose not to step onto its shore. He supported charities that Louise had loved and quietly helped young people pay for college. He spoke little about the castle. On December 5, 1916, George Boldt died of a heart attack in his Waldorf suite. He was 65. He was buried beside Louise at Woodlawn Cemetery in the Bronx. His estate went to George Jr. and Clover. With it came Hart Island and the castle that had been started for their mother. It was not their dream. In 1918, they sold the island. The buyer was Edward John Noble, owner of Beechnut and the businessman who helped make Lifesavers candy famous. He saw potential in the castle's mystery. Newspapers had already told the story of love and loss. Tour boats passed the island daily. He imagined a hotel, a resort, or a paid attraction. But he did not invest in finishing or guarding the property. He allowed visitors to come freely, often with little supervision. Harsh winters cracked stone and warped wood. Graffiti crawled across plaster. People stripped copper pipes and wiring. Decorative metal and carved wood disappeared piece by piece. In 1939, fireworks set the powerhouse roof on fire, leaving it blackened and exposed. During World War II, Hart Island was stripped of iron and steel, weakening parts of the structure. Louise's gardens grew wild. The Swan Pond turned stagnant. Even the yacht house started to sag with leaks and broken windows. By the mid-20th century, Hart Island looked like a romantic ruin, beautiful from far away, broken up close. Engineers called it unsafe. When Edward Noble died, a foundation inherited the island but did little to save it. As damage grew, the risk of total loss grew with it. In the 1970s, the foundation looked for someone who could rescue the place. In 1977, the Thousand Islands Bridge Authority stepped forward. The deal was simple and strict. Hart Island would transfer for $1 if every dollar of visitor revenue would be spent on restoration and upkeep. No government funds. The site had to pay for itself. The new owners faced a hard truth: decades of weather and vandalism had done deep harm. Still, they signed. It was time to save the castle. Over the winter of 1977 to 1978, crews made the island safe, bracing weak walls, patching urgent roof leaks, fencing dangerous areas, and setting temporary supports. In spring 1978, Hart Island reopened, not as a polished attraction but as an honest one. Visitors saw the damage and repairs at the same time: scaffolding against carved stone, piles of materials beside crumbling walls, and workers in hard hats doing careful work. The public responded. Admission fees went straight into new roofs, stronger structures, and basic security. A cycle began: the more people came, the more work could be done. The restoration team chose a careful philosophy. Some rooms would be finished as George and Louise intended based on drawings, photographs, and surviving materials. Other rooms would be left unfinished on purpose to show what "stop all construction" really meant. The balance told the truth. Love built the castle and loss interrupted it. By the 1980s, visitors could walk through restored spaces on the first floor and then climb to raw rooms above where exposed brick and old marks told the decades-long story of abandonment. Down at the river, the powerhouse rose again with a new roof and exhibits explaining early electricity. Across the water, the yacht house regained strength and began displaying antique boats, reminding everyone how central boating had been to life here. Outside, crews rebuilt the Italian gardens in Louise's spirit. They repaired pools, laid paths, planted hedges, and chose flowers to bloom in waves through the season. It was not a perfect copy. Too much had been lost. But the feeling, order, light, and quiet beauty returned. The message of Hart Island began to shine more clearly with each season. Some treasures are worth saving not because they were finished but because they tell the truth about love, ambition, and time. The Bridge Authority treated the island not as a tourist trap but as a living restoration site. Workers studied old blueprints, photographs, and records from the early 1900s. When possible, they reused original materials. When something had rotted beyond repair, they copied it using matching stone and traditional methods. The first goal was stability: seal leaks, strengthen walls, and make the structure safe. Once the castle could be entered, the slow work of recreation began. Broken windows were replaced with glass made to look like older panes. Iron railings were recast from surviving fragments. Carpenters traced remaining trim to reproduce missing sections. It wasn't only about fixing a building. It was about respecting a memory. The workers understood they were restoring a home that had been built as a love letter. Down by the water stood the powerhouse, one of the most striking buildings on the island. From a distance it looked like a medieval tower, but inside it had once been filled with machinery that produced electricity for the entire estate. The fire had left it hollow, yet the stone shell survived. Crews rebuilt the roof, reinforced stonework, and turned the interior into a small museum. Exhibits explained how George Boldt had planned for modern conveniences, electric lights, central heating, and telephones. Visitors could picture the hum of power that once flowed from the building into every room and walkway. The rebuilt powerhouse became a symbol of renewal, darkened by disaster, still capable of light. Across the channel, the yacht house had weathered decades of storms. Restorers replaced rotted sections while keeping the building's original shape, a vast structure large enough to store boats in tall bays. When it reopened, it carried the smell of varnish and river water again. The space felt alive, not as a private boathouse but as a museum of a region shaped by boats, islands, and summer life. While stonemasons worked on the castle, landscape crews returned to Louise's gardens. Old photographs guided the rebuilding of terraces, steps, fountains, and the rhythm of plantings. They replanted with blooms chosen to feel peaceful and ordered, restoring paths that invited slow walks and quiet conversation. The gardens could never be exactly as they were, but they once again carried her taste, graceful, controlled, and full of living color against the permanence of stone. Inside the castle, each room required patience. Craftsmen rebuilt woodwork, repaired plaster, and recreated finishes that fit the era. Some rooms glowed again under chandeliers. Others remained bare by design. This contrast is what makes Boldt Castle different. A fully finished palace can impress, but an interrupted one can speak. The unfinished upper levels, left raw, show the moment the dream stopped. They preserve the emotional truth, 90% complete, and yet forever incomplete. By the late 20th century and into the early 2000s, the restoration grew year by year, funded by visitors. Piece by piece the castle regained its dignity. Modern safety systems were installed carefully, hidden so the old style remained. Stonework was repaired, roofs sealed, and public spaces improved. Hart Island became not only a destination but a working example of how communities can rescue historic places when enough people care. Today Hart Island has become one of the most romantic destinations in North America. Every summer, couples choose to marry there. Some exchange vows in the gardens, others inside restored rooms or in the Alster Tower. The irony is gentle, a place born from heartbreak now witnesses celebrations of new love again and again. Couples often choose Boldt Castle because it feels timeless, proof that love, even interrupted, can leave something lasting behind. Boldt Castle is also a classroom without walls. Students come to learn architecture, engineering, and the social history of the Gilded Age. They see how an immigrant like George Boldt could rise from clearing tables to shaping luxury hospitality. They learn that success is built through attention, discipline, and partnership, and that fortune cannot protect anyone from loss. For the region, the castle is more than a story, it supports local life. Restoration work and tourism built jobs for boat operators, craftspeople, and small businesses along the river. A private love story turned into a public resource. The most striking thing about Boldt Castle is that it remains intentionally incomplete. That choice gives it emotional honesty. If it had been finished exactly as George planned, it would be another grand estate. But the halted construction, the unfinished spaces, and the silence in certain rooms remind visitors that life can change without warning. The castle's unfinished walls say what words cannot: love is powerful, but it doesn't always get a happy ending. Yet even unfinished love can leave beauty behind. When visitors leave, they carry more than photos. They carry a shift in how they see small things. They notice light in ordinary rooms and think of Louise choosing softness and order. They see someone working quietly in service and think of George starting at the bottom, learning how to make people feel valued. They pass old buildings and think, someone could save that, because they have seen what rescue looks like. Some carry a wedding ring and a new last name. Some carry a brochure folded into a book. Some carry a child asleep on a shoulder. All carry the river air in their clothes and the memory of stone warmed by meaning. People often turn for one last look from the departing boat. The castle seems smaller from the water than it did up close, yet larger in what it represents. It is no longer only towers and windows. It is a story about work, beauty, grief, and care. It is proof that a gift meant for one person can become a gift for many without losing its heart. The engine hums, the wake spreads, the island slips behind, but the lesson stays: start what matters, share what you can, be honest about what you cannot finish, and leave room for others to continue the work.